if you're looking at Samsonov as a potential for the Edmonton Oilers, and I want to go over some other rumors and some free agents that are left, and of course trade targets for the Oilers, and we can talk about the Leafs a little bit. I also think some active teams like the St. Louis Blues and Bo and Byram. So we're going to talk about a bunch of scenarios here. But for Samsonov with the Oilers connection, do the Oilers feel this is enough of an upgrade to take a chance with him? I kind of went over the record in terms of a positive record with Vegas, but it is .891 save percentage. Like, you have Stuart Skinner, so you're not really upgrading in that sense. Landing spots are limited. I already kind of talked about maybe some other teams looking for a third goalie or teams that have had injury issues. There are some teams that want to upgrade, maybe a team like Carolina, but Edmonton has the clear need. So does it make sense for the Oilers to take a flyer with Samsonov and them going, hey, we'll go into the year with Samsonov, Skinner, and Pickard all competing for the number one spot? Or do they do this? Do they sign a guy like Samsonov and then flip Skinner for an upgrade in net, and then have that upgrade in net as 1, Samsonov at 2, and then go back to Pickard being your third goalie, which was what was initially intended when they signed Pickard? So I think that's kind of the conversation for the Edmonton Oilers, and if they want to get a goalie. Max Pacioretty left. I still think it's going to be Detroit or Toronto. I think Toronto's put some interest out there. They loved his playoff performance, of course, so we'll see. But I do think Pacioretty makes a lot of sense to return to Toronto. But there's been those conversations around Detroit putting those cheaper veterans around their younger forwards. They've already brought in James Van Riemsdyk, and I did like the sneaky signing. It's not really a veteran, but Bernard Docker was a good signing too. Jeff Skinner is a really curious one because there's a lot of teams that missed out on Ehlers and Besser in terms of just pure scoring like Besser. Skinner can provide maybe 15, 20 goals on a season. So some teams that need the scoring and it's potentially a low cap it, why not take a flyer on Jeff Skinner? Obviously the Oilers didn't love that experiment, but there are other teams out there that probably need some secondary scoring. Skinner at 33, is it a great option? No, but it's an option to get you 15 goals. Viveiros just signed with the Washington Capitals off the board. Luke Cunnin, I've talked about so many different teams looking for Luke Cunnin to be kind of that versatile, I would say, option. Indifferent to a guy like Jack Roslovic, who's also versatile, that can play center and wing. Cunnin's a little bit more like two-way presence, physical presence potentially. He definitely brings more of a physicality, much more than a guy like Roslovic. So that's also the conversation. But his offense hasn't peaked in a while. Like, we're talking back 2019-20 with the Wild. So we'll see. I do think there's definitely interest there. But you're not going to give him, I would say, that bigger cap it that maybe he wants. It might be a prove-it deal, or it could be a longer term and just he accepts what kind of role he's in, which is probably a third or fourth line player. Kivy Rant is also interesting. Then other UFAs like Georgiev is probably the next goalie on the board after Samsonov. But to me, like the way Georgiev's played, it's clear Samsonov's the better option. Guys like Shillington might get a chance as a bottom pair guy. I'm very curious about a guy like Brett Leeson, though, because he looked good a couple of years ago with the Anaheim Ducks. I think on a cheap deal, like a team like Toronto that's trying to get a cheaper fourth line, $775 or like $800,000 for Brett Leeson, like that would be a good bet for me. Guys like Brett Leeson or Klim Kostin or Craig Smith, like get those guys cheap. That's what the Florida Panthers did for their fourth line. So if you're talking about things for success, like that makes sense to me. But yeah, I do think that when you're talking about the Edmonton Oilers, they got to decide if they're going free agency or trade route for the goaltender, because that's a huge conversation in Edmonton right now. And frankly, I think you can't run it back. Like there's certain conversations right now in the league where you just can't run it back, and that's one of them. And there are a lot of the trade conversations right now in terms of targets and maybe like the Leafs, Oilers, even a team like the Blues that I love what Doug Armstrong's doing. There's other teams that are like very heavy in the rumors right now. Like Utah is like connected to everything. I feel like Calgary's connected to a lot. And the Mason McTavish name keeps popping up. So while that's an RFA, not a UFA, I think if I had to talk about guys that are either in the eyes of potentially an offer sheet or potentially for a trade, like Byram, McTavish, and Rossi are at the top of that list right now. I'm sure there's other names, but like those three are definitely up there, so keep an eye on that.